I first heard of Greg Brownderville when a couple of writer friends of mine were praising him to the skies. They went on and on about him for so long. You know how people sometimes go on about something so much they actually kind of start pushing you in the opposite direction? Or maybe I'm just stubborn that way, but they lavished so much praise on this young writer that I was really inwardly beginning to resist. Started to think that this Arkansas Shakespeare they were waxing on about just couldn't be all that. Then I read some of Greg's poems and thought, oh, who is this guy? This wunderkind with a pen from Pumpkin Bend. So I learned that he's a native of Woodruff County who'd attended Ouachita Baptist for college and Ole Miss for grad school. At that time, he was just embarking on the teaching career that has led to his current position as director of the creative writing program at Southern Methodist University, SMU, in Dallas. So not only did Greg's poems blow me away, but once we actually met, I found him to be a wonderful person. He's genuine, he's warm, he's direct, he's a great storyteller, and he has a huge range of interests and knowledge that reveals itself only gradually because he's so self-effacing. Greg is steeped in the English poetic tradition. His work is laced with humor and allusion, includes a beautifully executed variety of forms from many ages and cultures. He draws deeply on Arkansas folklore, nature, and roots culture, a mix of the vernacular and the surreal. Think sort of John Prime mixed with Gaudí. His published books are Deep Down in the Delta, Gust, and A Horse with Holes in It. Greg has long been a friend of Hendrix College. He taught in our Maymester term that we had a few years ago, and twice served as guest teacher on the multidisciplinary Buffalo River Odyssey trip in the Arkansas Ozarks. I've been lucky enough to sit on the deck of a log cabin on those trips and hear Greg read and teach in the gloaming. At a poetry reading, you get to use words like gloaming. As the fireflies came out and the whippoorwills and Chuckwill's widows began to call. One of Greg's poems, Prosometrum 3, The Homemade Fireworks, tells about a student who miswrote the poet's name as B.R. Wondervillage. Recounting this to his uncle, the speaker in the poem says, I asked if he was issuing a challenge to my whole life, be our Wonder Village. Greg, I believe you are our Wonder Village. Please join me in welcoming Greg Brownderville.
Can y'all hear me? Yeah, I just want to make sure this thing was working. Thank you, Hope, for that lovely introduction. It's so good to be back at Hendrix College. This place is very special to me. Some of my closest friends in the world are alums of Hendrix. I love the campus, and it makes me think about Cardinal Newman's descriptions of his experience as an undergraduate, just that wonderful feeling that you get on a college campus with that warmth of the mind and kind of intellectual electricity. Just makes me want to get a quilt and sit out there and read some Kierkegaard or something. And and it's wonderful to be in this beautiful room and to see some of the people who are dearest to my heart on the whole planet here tonight. My parents, my brother, some of my college professors from Ouachita, and Hope, and Henrietta, and Marjorie, and all the people who have been so kind to me here at Hendrix. Thank you all for having me. This is a very unusual presentation for me tonight. I'm doing a kind of presentation I've never done before because I'm working on a kind of project that I've never worked on before. And it's special to me that my undergraduate poetry mentor, Johnny Wink, is here tonight. Johnny and I met right before I started attending Ouachita Baptist University. We got to be friends, writing letters, and then we met and took many a walk around Arkadelphia have been writing letters ever since and hanging out and just the best of friends. And way back when I was an undergraduate at Ouachita, I had this idea that I talked to Johnny about. And it really came out of an experience I was having in writing poems. Before I started writing poetry when I was a little kid, I drew a lot of I like to draw pictures, and I like to draw cartoons, and thought that I would be a cartoonist when I was little bitty, and also liked to play music. My dad is here tonight, who taught me to play guitar and is a wonderful teacher. And he, when I was 6 years old, my sister had a flutophone recorder that she brought home from school, and I was playing it, and I was really having a good time with it. And Daddy looked at me and said, "I believe you could blow a French harp like Daddy did," talking about his dad. And so that Christmas in my stocking, I had a French harmonica, and I've been playing those ever since. And we have a musical family, so I've been playing music. And so I like to draw, I like to play music, but my deepest love when it comes to the arts is poetry. But sometimes when I would be writing a poem, I would want to use an image that was very difficult to work into a poem. It was possible to get it into the poem, but I would think, this would actually be better if I could just draw a picture of it. Like, this is a kind of image that would work better as a picture. And what bothered me is that I felt limited to the form of the poem. So if I'm writing a poem and I want to drop a picture in the middle of it, I mean, you can do that, but it's not a common thing to do, and it's not really mainstream poetic practice. And so there were some images that I never used in poems. For example, those of you who are from rural Arkansas might know what I'm talking about. There's this thing that you see out in the country called a Georgia buggy. It's a certain kind of grain buggy, and it has an auger on it, this little thin thing that extends out from the buggy. And the end of it always looked to me like a giraffe's head, and with that long, kind of stem on it, made me think of the auger made me think of a giraffe's neck. And some of those Georgia buggies will be yellow, and then they'll rust, and they'll take on this pattern of spots that will make them look even more like giraffes. And this is a very difficult thing to, you could describe it, certainly, in writing, but it would be better, in my opinion, just to show it, and then you maybe could use words to deepen the audience's experience of that image. And so I had this idea, what if we created this thing called the Magic Theater? This was the idea I had as an undergrad. And I imagined it as an actual physical space, like a building. And even the building would be built to accommodate the story, to express, to help tell the story. And the different rooms would have different kinds of art in them, so that you might have a combination of sculpture and dance and drama and music and poetry, whatever, to tell the story. And you would just choose at every turn which art form would do the best job of telling that part of the story or expressing that feeling or thought. And Johnny and I talked about it quite a bit, and it's not going to happen anytime soon because, for one thing, I didn't really have a team of artists that could pull it off, and I didn't have the infrastructure, I didn't have the funding. But I never really forgot about it. And I would hear people having debates, about books and movies. If you had a movie, say, that was based on a book, people would argue about whether the book was better or the movie was better. And most of my friends, I have a lot of friends in the literary world, would vehemently insist that the book is always better. But I didn't really want to think about it as the book versus the movie. For me, it was more interesting to think about it scene by scene. And sometimes I would think there was a kind of scene that did work better in the movie, and that there was a kind of scene that worked better in the book. And this started to kind of blur into my thinking about the Magic Theater. And this kind of rocked on, and I kept thinking about it through the years. And finally I thought, maybe with digital technology, I can create something that functions sort of like the Magic Theater. And I had been really getting into the art form known as the podcast, and I love podcasts, and I've thought about how technology in the form of the printing press to a large extent took the oral tradition away from us, but technology is now giving it back because you've got some very fine writing happening for podcasts, and people are getting interested in literature as a thing in the air rather than a thing on the page. For example, I loved the podcast S-Town. I thought the writing was strong. It was a very interesting, and it was that one I loved especially well because the thing that made you want to keep listening wasn't like a cliffhanger ending of an episode, but just the fascination of the central character. You just wanted to know more about this character, and because the writing was good and the character was interesting. So I was thinking about that, and I've gotten to know some folks in Dallas in the filmmaking scene, and I've heard a lot of filmmakers talk about how it's difficult sometimes to explore ideas and the interiority of your characters or a backstory or something like that because the film will bog down as a result. And so they have to kind of sneak that material into the film, and great filmmakers are highly skilled at this. But the podcast is a thing that you go to for that deep dive into an idea or a backstory or some kind of something that would be difficult at times to weave into a film. And film can do wonderful things with imagery and action. And so I had this idea that I would create not a magic theater, but something I'm calling a Go show, and for mobile devices. And the way I imagined it is that I would have all art forms available to me, all mediums available to me, but especially focus on podcasts and short videos, and use the podcast for the parts of the story that it would do the better job of telling, and use the videos for the parts of the story that video would do the better job of telling. And then have some other kind of snack-like pieces of content sprinkled in, music, still photography, and so forth. And I'd been working on this idea for some time, and it was a huge undertaking for me as a writer because I was writing a kind of material that I wasn't used to writing, namely scripts for podcasts and scripts for videos. And I wanted there to be a textual component, so I was also writing poems. So I'd been working on it, writing these scripts, and I knew that I needed to put a team together. And I talked to this guy in Dallas who's very well connected in the film and podcasting scene. And he said, I think you should talk to this guy named Bart Weiss, who's the co-founder of the Dallas Video Fest, which is a successful and long-running film fest. So I scheduled a meeting with Bart, and we met at this little tavern called 10 Bells Tavern, which is close to where I live in Dallas. And it's kind of an artsy hangout and casual place. We met there, and we got there's a drink that's very popular in Texas called Topo Chico that Bart and I both love. It's a Mexican mineral water. So we both had Topo Chicos, and I remember we slapped them down on the table, and Bart said, okay, so tell me about this project. And I explained it to him, and I could tell that he was interested, and his responses as I was talking gave me to see that he not only liked the idea of the Go show, but he really got the textures and kind of the aesthetics that I was envisioning. And he said, let me think, because my idea was, Bart, you have a lot of former students around Dallas who are in the film, and you know people that you could connect with me to, who could help me with this. And he said, yeah, I've got some amazing former students who would be great at this. Let me think about it. Let's meet again in like a week and a half. So we met again at 10 Bells, and we sat down with our Topo Chicos. I noticed he put his down on the table a bit more forcefully than the time before. And he said, I want to direct this. So we might involve former students, but I really want to direct this. And so and I'd never even imagined that he would. and that he would bring his many years of experience to this project. But we really saw eye to eye and hit it off, so we started working on it right away. That was in June of 2016, and we've been working on it ever since. And I still had a ton of writing to do on the scripts, and I needed to wrangle that story into shape. And so we've come up with this. We've finished all the shooting for the Ghost Show, the first Ghost Show, which is called Firebones. And we are in the stage now of recording audio for podcasts and editing video, and we're developing the technology to deliver this thing. And the way it will work is that you download this app on your phone or on some other mobile device, like an iPad or something like that, and then you start getting push notifications. You can't binge this because we're using the time lapse between pieces of content as a dramatic element of the story, so that when we want things to feel that kind of, you know how like a certain day in your life might seem to fly by and the next day drags, we're using those spaces between pieces of content to simulate that perceived elasticity of time and the way it can feel different day to day. And so you download this app, you get a push notification, and say you have a new episode of Firebones, and it might be, you don't really know what it'll be until you click on it. It could be a podcast, it could be a video, it could be a set of still photos, it could be a song, it could be a video poem. I'll talk about that a little bit more later. But whatever it is, it's going to advance the story. And the heavy lifting narratively is being done by podcast and video. There'll be for this Ghost Show, Firebones, there'll be 8 videos and 5 podcasts. The videos are short, the podcasts are somewhat longer. And then we are doing these video poems, and I want to say something about that. I'm not much interested in taking a poem that already exists and then putting a video to it, or taking a video and writing words to it. I think it's possible to do that well. I've seen some of that work that I do enjoy, but most of the time, my sense is that they're stepping on each other's toes. I mean, if it was a good poem already, why do you need the video? If it was a good piece of video already, why do you need the poem? But I'm working with the Firebones cinematographer, Christian Vasquez, who is really a poet of the screen. His sense of imagery is exquisite and very unusual. So we'll get together and we'll talk about an idea for a video poem, and we filmed lots of B-roll in the Delta, so we have all this wonderful imagery to look at, and the thing just starts taking shape, and maybe I start it with a phrase, or he starts it with a couple of images, and then I start writing to that, and then that gives him an idea for another image, which gives me an idea for more language. So the two things are coming into, the language and the imagery are taking shape alongside each other, and we just keep working at it because we're trying to avoid redundancies. We don't want the two things, image and language, to be stepping on each other's toes. So that's how the poetry is working in the Ghost Show. And I should say something about the actual story of Firebones, because I'm talking more about the form. Bart and I were having a lot of meetings about this project. And at the time, I had become obsessed with making ice cream. And it was a side hustle, but I really wanted to make the perfect vanilla. And I had this taste in my imagination, I just wasn't going to stop. I mean, it was ridiculous. I probably made something like, hundreds of batches of ice cream, trying to get this special vanilla taste. And Bart, we were having meetings during that time, and so every time he came over to my apartment, I had a new batch of ice cream. And Bart loves ice cream. I mean, he's more than anyone else I've ever known. And then he would be disappointed if I didn't have the ice cream when he came over. So the whole project took shape over little bowls of ice cream. And so we decided to just work that into the story. And the idea in Firebones is that Bart and I were talking about ice cream one day, and I said, there's a special ice cream that we make in the Delta. The homemade ice cream in the Delta is different. And he says, and he's thinking, well, how is it different? And I said, well, it's got this kind of snow creamy texture, kind of icy, but in a pleasing way. And it's actually very low butter fat, usually something like 7 to 8%. It's not like the premium, super premium American ice creams. And then he says, well, I really want to taste this. Can you make it for me? And then I say, well, it's not that far away. Let's just go to the Delta and have somebody who's very experienced at making this stuff make it for us. And in fact, my mother did wind up making us some, and Bart was very pleased. He was deeply pleased by Mama's ice cream, and wants more, by the way. But the idea in the Go Show is we're making this road trip to the Delta just to get some of this ice cream, and when we get into the region, we come down out of the hills, we pass the Regional Welcome Center, and now we're getting into fiction land. And in the fictional world of Firebones, the Regional Welcome Center is this thing called the Silo Spaceship. And there's a character there who's sort of half beekeeper, half spaceman. The beekeeper suits kind of look like spaceman suits. So he's called the Beekeeper Spaceman. So he's sort of an earthy figure and also a flight of, he sort of represents a flight of fancy. And he thinks that this giant silo is a spaceship. And he takes you up in the spaceship. So it's an odd kind of welcome center, like, welcome to the Delta, let's leave, and go. And so I know that this is going to freak Bart out, and it's kind of weird him out. So I say, let's stop at the Regional Welcome Center. And he's thinking, like, bad coffee and brochures, but it turns out, it's this crazy experience with the Beekeeper Spaceman. And what happens is that the Beekeeper Spaceman says while we're up in space that something's gone wrong with his silo spaceship, and he's not going to be able to get it back to Earth, and we're going to have to park it on a secret planet known as Swan. And we'll never be able to go back to Earth, so we're just going to have to live out the rest of our lives on Swan. I mean, we know this isn't true. We're still in the Delta, but it just heightens Bart's sense of how profoundly weird this trip is going to be. And he tells us, though, before he lets us out of the silo spaceship, he says, there's this guy named Jumon Poi who's an excellent chef, and he makes wonderful ice cream, and you really need to go get some ice cream from him if that's the purpose of your mission, because he's stranded on Swan too, and he'll hook you up with some ice cream. So Bart and I decide, okay, we'll look up Jumon Poi and see if he'll make ice cream for us. And he says he will. And we go over to his house, and we walk in, and he says, guys, I'll make y'all some ice cream, but first we're going to have to finish watching the football game. And he starts talking about the football game. It's an Arkansas Razorback football game. And he's describing it, and I'm a serious Razorback fan. I am my mother's child. In my family, it's the women and Greg who like football. None of the men really could give a flip about it. But Mama and I have logged many an hour watching some Razorback football. So I know the lore of Razorback football. I know the history of it. And I know that this game that he says is on right now, that's being played right then in that moment, is not a game that's being played. And we go into his living room and we start watching it. And I know the game. It's a legend. It's a famous game. It's the 1995 Arkansas-Auburn game. And I say, oh, this is 1995, that year we go on to win the Western Division of the SEC. And Jumon gets really angry, and it's like, shh, he doesn't want me. And it becomes clear, Bart pulls his iPhone out because he's bored. He doesn't really care about football. And Jumon lunges across the room and grabs his iPhone and puts it under the couch cushion. And it becomes clear that in Jumon's house, it is 1995. He only watches 1995 television. He's got a 1995 calendar on the wall. He's using 90s slang when he talks. And we find out that he dated a woman in 1995 named Amr Bustani, a Lebanese American. There's a significant Lebanese American demographic in the Delta and kind of around in Mississippi and Arkansas, Louisiana. And it didn't even date that long. but it meant everything to Jumon. And it's like 20-something years later. He's in his 50s now. He was 27 when they dated. He's now in his 50s. He's never gotten over it. And he's just living in 1995, and he even has a woman in his house pretending to be Amra, wearing a mask. And it kind of freaks Bart and me out. We don't know what to do about this. And so we wind up leaving. And then we start asking around town. It turns out this Amr Bustani that he's hung up on, this ex-girlfriend, in the last year has gone missing. And she's a Pentecostal preacher of a church called, her church is called the Firebones Tabernacle. It's a reference to that piece of scripture about the Spirit of the Lord is as a fire shut up in my bones, which is a favorite of Pentecostals. And she's a Pentecostal preacher. She was a Maronite Christian in her childhood, but she's a convert to Pentecostalism. And she is also a crop duster pilot. And she's so good at this that she's been getting contracts with a company called Sky Tractor that manufactures crop duster planes. And they pay her. People actually do this for a living. I don't know if y'all know. There are these ferry pilots who will fly like a crop duster to an overseas buyer. They'll put fuel in the hopper where the pesticides and things will normally be and run a tube to the fuel tank so they can get over the ocean. And they deliver the plane that way. I know a guy in Texas who does it for a living. This is what she started doing for a living. She's making these ferry flights. And on one of her ferry flights to the Middle East, she disappeared. And she's been gone for like a year. Nobody knows what happened to her, at least as far as anybody in the town in Arkansas is concerned. And so there's this missing character, Amr Bustani, and that's really at the heart of the story. And since she's gone missing, this kind of hipster impresario guy, Chad Fonda, has bought the church. And because she owned it. She owned the land, she owned the building, Amr did. And she left it to her adopted daughter, this character named Gobody. And Gobody kind of has given up on Amr coming home. And she sold the church to Chad Fonda. And Chad Fonda's living in the church. You know how the churches have those little signs out front? You know, that say things like CH__CH, what's missing in church, you are, you know, or turn or burn. That's one of my favorites. One time, I think our own home church had on our sign something like, think Halloween is scary, wait till you see hell. And my high school English teacher, Rod Kidwell, who's a serious bicyclist for many, many years, for decades, he was riding his bike past there and he saw that and he said, Greg, I'm not trying to say anything bad about your church, but what's up with that think Halloween is scary, wait till you see hell? Am I going? You know, because it just kind of assumes that you are. You're going to. So anyway, he inherited one of these signs, and he's just putting like absurdist haiku up on that thing, just like ridiculous stuff. And so the town doesn't know what to make of it, and he's having these parties that are purely secular, but they're kind of themed as church services. So instead of testimony service, you have maybe a fiction reading, or instead of speaking in tongues, someone recites a poem in another language, and then someone freestyles a translation in English or something. You know, so they're doing church-like things, but Pentecostal things, but it's purely secular. And all the artistic weirdos in the Delta countryside are flocking to this thing. They're like, finally, we have a place. You know, when we're all together, we're really not weird. We're just, you know, in our group. And so it's pretty popular. And he calls his services Donnybrooks. And so that's going on in the town. And Bart and I become fascinated with all of this. And we never quite forget about the ice cream, which we never get. You know, but we're really fascinated in this whole scene that unfolds before us in this little town. So that is kind of the narrative premise of it all. And what I want to do is show y'all some pieces of this ghost show. This is my video editors have really insisted, kind of got up in my face about it, that I tell y'all these are rough cuts. The editors would never be happy releasing any of this. It's all rough, and nobody's seen it. I mean, except just the core team members of Firebones. And I've been working with my brother Eric on a lot of the music because we're writing and recording music for it. and we've been doing podcasts and and these videos. And so we have these kind of rough pieces of content that I just want to give you a flavor of it. And it's I want to show you the prologue with the Beekeeper Spaceman. And there's this one moment where he's asking us to look out the window, and you're just going to see like a green curtain, something that the filmmakers in the audience will know about. It's called a green screen. We're going to put some digital art into that space in a later cut. And see if there's anything else. I'm going to show you the prologue, and then I'm going to skip that episode with Juman with the 1995 football game and all that. We don't even have a rough cut of that yet. And then I want to play just a short excerpt from a podcast in which we meet the young woman that Amra adopted, and her name is GoBody. So we'll hear a little bit of her story, and you'll kind of see how the podcasts work, and then how the transition from a podcast into a video works. Because right after we hear that excerpt from the podcast, we'll watch an excerpt from a video episode that will come right after that podcast in the actual sequence of the Go Show. And all these pieces of content are very, very short. The prologue's a little bit longer, but most of them are pretty short. And then after the video episode with GoBody, where she tells about her mother's disappearance with the sky tractor, fairy flight, and all that, I'll play you one of the video poems. And let me just say one thing about that before we start to show you the media content. I fell in love with Shakespeare very early. It's one of my first literary loves. And one thing I've always been fascinated by in those Shakespeare plays is the way that he kind of gets away with murder as a lyric poet, in the sense that you've got this play with these tremendously rich, complex narratives. Characters they're fleshed out fully. We care about these characters. We're fascinated by them. And then you get the great speech, And the great speech is usually carrying very little narrative responsibility. It's not having to fill in all the backstory or imply the backstory. That's already done by the play, and you just get this lyrical launch, into Shakespeare's soliloquy land, and it's beautiful. And I don't know that we can really appreciate those great speeches as standalone poems, because they're backlit and they're informed and inflected and complicated in wonderful ways by the narratives around them. And so the Hope mentioned in her introduction that I did some prosometra in my last book. This was an attempt to do something. In a prosometrum, you can set up in prose sections, you can set up all this narrative, and then you can have a lyrical moment where you don't have to tell stories. Because my primary impulse as a poet is lyric. But I come from a storytelling culture, so I'm often weaving stories in. But I really just want a chance to do the lyric thing and not worry about subtly implying this narrative, thinking about getting this sort of almost novel-like narrative implied in 15 lines. It's tough, and it's not. I enjoy the challenge, but you write differently when you do that. You don't have this. The lyricism is a little different. And so the video poems in Firebones give me a chance to do that, because the podcasts and the videos are really doing the storytelling work. So when it comes time for a poem video, you can just kind of sing. Okay, I think that's all I have to say, so let's get it started. So I'm happy to entertain comments or questions if anybody would like to offer them. Mm-hmm.
For your scheduled releases, are they just on like a day basis, or do you also determine what time they're released? Some release at night, maybe in the morning.
It's so the question is, when we're scheduling the releases for the bits of content, are we actually are we insisting about the time of day, like if it's at nighttime or it's morning or whatever? It's really about the interval. So if you downloaded the app the day it came out, you would start getting push notifications, and it's on a schedule, and there's X number of hours between this episode and the next episode. If someone else downloaded it 6 months from then at a different time of the day, then they're going to be on that same schedule. What we might do, though, is we might insist on the time of day by saying, okay, if the first episode is going to come at 1 p.m., the first time it's 1 p.m. after you download it, you know? So like if you downloaded it at 12 p.m., you're going to get the push notification an hour later, whereas if you downloaded it at 12 a.m., 12 hours before, you're still going to get it at 1 p.m. We might do it like that, because I would kind of like to control the time of day, but the big thing is keeping the intervals consistent. And once it comes to the app, you can go back and rewatch. So you could go back and watch the whole. You could binge it that way. But you have to have watched it to access it that way. So you can't just sit back and let it populate in the app and then binge it. And the reason for that is really twofold. There are more reasons than just two, but two that come to my mind. One is that we think it would be clunky and awkward to sit there and listen to put in your earbuds and listen to a podcast, then take the earbuds out, watch a video, then whereas there's a kind of palate cleanser for the imagination. If 2 days ago you listened to a podcast, some time goes by, then you get a video. And I'm thinking about this kind of the way I'm thinking about this in a larger artistic context. Like, very often it seems to me that art forms are taking something that we're already doing and elevating those things. So everyone moves around, but if you elevate that to art, you've got dance. Everybody uses language. If you elevate that to the level of art, you have literature. If everybody is having not everybody, but most people these days are having an interactive digital experience that involves text, video, audio, all the time. And so that's become such an important part of contemporary life in the industrialized world. And so we're thinking, let's make that art. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the question is, was I intentionally incorporating images of flight in several different pieces of content so that becomes a thematic and maybe even imagistic motif? Yeah, because Amra, it's a strange thing. Amra Bustani is the center of the story, and she's never on the screen. She's missing, and she's a pilot. And that idea of flight is very important, primarily because of her character, and also like the sense of the imagination, the flight of fancy, so, and the birds, all that. But it started for me with Amra. Mm-hmm. Johnny? Johnny Wink has asked, is it true that you've only seen 3 movies in your life? Yes. I've only seen 3 movies: Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, The Firm, and Teen Wolf. This has been a running joke for years. It's true. I mean, I grew up in Pumpkin Bend, Arkansas. We were, Mama, 35 minutes from the nearest movie theater, something like that. It wasn't really a part of our family culture, and we didn't watch them at home. We didn't really go to the movies that often. And I just didn't develop the habit, and so I missed out on a lot of movies. So it is true that I've seen fewer movies than most people. And I just got tired of something you taught me about, Johnny, of you have an itis. You haven't seen whatever, And I just got so tired of it, and it was happening so much that I thought, how can I make this fun for me? So every time somebody berated me for not having seen some movie, I would say, well, I've only seen 3 movies. And I decided that my game was going to be, Teen Wolf would always be the last one, but the other 2 would constantly change. And I started doing this in my classes at SMU. And it started getting around. It became, everyone knew about it, and my colleagues believed it. I wasn't even really trying to fool anybody. And so one of my colleagues and a bunch of English majors scheduled this field trip, this kind of outing where we were all going to go watch a movie together, that latest Gatsby movie. And everyone, including my colleague, was so excited, like, Greg's fourth movie. It's like, and I think he was kind of hurt when I finally told him. I mean, I don't really think, I'm worried about that, but he's so cool. I'm sure I think he thought it was funny, really. He probably enjoyed it, but I felt a little bit bad because I wasn't really trying to fool anybody. I just got tired of that. You haven't seen? I've been catching up, I'm trying to get caught up. I'm still behind. Doug? Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, it's a good question. Might it be awkward to negotiate these changes in tone from comic to somber to comic? Because obviously some of this content is just absurdist, and then some of it is, very somber seeming. Well, this becomes a huge theme in the story, actually, because what happens in this town is that, I don't want to say too much and give away the story, but these factions form in the town, and everybody's mad at everybody, and you have this kind of little battles in the town of Thisaway, Arkansas. That's the town that this is set in. And, Thisaway is in Thisaway and Thataway. And there are some characters who are championing a sense of humor and laughter as a way just to open up some space in which people might begin to talk to each other as though they were both human beings. It's because I think humorlessness is a huge problem in our culture, generally, to say the truth. So I'm trying. That's a theme in the piece. So actually, that problematic that you're fastening onto is right at the heart of the story. Mm-hmm. Elliot. Mm-hmm. This is a great question, which is how, in a creative collaboration involving several people, do you make sure that everyone gets to play ball and, get involved in the expressive act of making art? How do some people's voices get crowded out? Do other people's voices dominate? How do you make sure everyone is involved in getting to play ball? That's pretty much the question, right? Yeah. I think one thing that's important is understanding what you are bringing to the table and what you're not bringing to the table. And if you choose people, if you eliminate redundancies as much as you can, this also helps with funding, frankly. You can only pay for so much help. So if you're bringing, like I wrote all the scripts, I dreamed all this stuff up at this level of story, and I'm writing music and recording music. But what I'm not a cinematographer. I'm not a director. I'm not a producer. I will probably have producer credits on this because I'm just kind of having to do it, but I'm not. We need somebody who's an actual producer, and we do have such a person, Rija Nadim, who's been excellent. And so I built a team to fill in those gaps. And so, like, my brother and I have been working on the music, and we've talked about this. Like, the things that he's really good at are different from the things that I'm really good at. And so we work together really well. And we're not both wanting to do X. He's wanting to do X, I'm wanting to do Y, so it works out. So it's something about team building, find people who can who can help you, but who won't, find people who won't be in awkward competition with you, you know. Although you may, as a it's not that I wouldn't work with another writer, I would, but I would want to make sure that there was a good understanding about who's doing what and why we have two writers. You know, maybe you're not good at a certain kind of, maybe one person, like I'm working on a project right now, kind of on the side, it's connected to Firebones, but it's different, and there needs to be a bunch of novelistic prose, and that's not really my forte, so I'm working with a novelist. You know, I think it's just about knowing what you bring to the table and what you need other people to do. Quinn.
Yeah, you said that this was just like the first of like assuming more for like other projects. Do you think that bringing like different mediums of art, animation and comics or something like that?
Yeah, I do. So the question is, if this is the first go show of many that I might wind up doing, would I bring in other art forms, dance, animation? So, yeah, and we discussed many of those when we were doing Firebones, and we looked at our funding, our team, figured out what was possible, but many of those possibilities were on the table initially, and I think they will be on the table again in the future. Mm-hmm. Well, our goal is late October, early November, but we're having to develop the tech too, and so we don't, you know, we're in some uncharted territory here, and we might run into snags we can't imagine yet. So we'll see, but that's our goal. I mean, we're working hard to get that, to make that happen. I think I saw some hands back in the back, yeah, way back. Yeah, Limetown. Yeah, I like those. I think that a lot of times they rely too much on, well, I shouldn't say too much. For my taste, they get a little page-turnery with the cliffhanger ending of the episode. You know, I'm not a huge fan of that, but it's not that I dislike it. It's, you know, if you're going to the next episode because of the cliffhanger, then once you find out, it's kind of like, there's not a strong desire on my part to go back and listen to it again. Whereas with S-Town, because what was driving me was the depth and fascination of the complexity of the character, I would want to go back and listen to those episodes. You know, it was something deeper and more intellectually and emotionally nutritious that I was getting from it, you know. And so I do like fictional podcasts. I think they could be, I think we'll see much, much stronger fictional podcasts in the next 5 to 10 years. Because right now everybody's just trying to imitate the last one that was successful. I mean, the Nightshade ones are more creative and playful, I think. You know, those Nightshade. Is that the right name? Night Vale, yeah, those. I think those are really, you know, those are playful and aesthetically adventurous. You know, I'm kind of attracted to some of what they're doing. Mm-hmm. Our idea is to make it free. Yeah. It was never really an entrepreneurial venture, you know. I mean, maybe we'll monetize it some way, somehow in the future, but we're going to press the soundtrack on vinyl, and that will be available for purchase. And there will be a book, too, because a lot of the artists who hang out at the new Firebones after the impresario Chad Fonda turns it into an art space, a lot of those folks are writers, and I'm doing an anthology of their work. You know, I mean, I'm writing it, but it's so there will be things you can buy, but I think the app we're just going to give away. That's the plan for now. Back here, yeah.
So you mentioned earlier that you have great admiration for Shakespeare, and you know one of the things I noticed in the podcast was the fact that the character was originally called Nobody.
Mm-hmm.
And you know the first thing one thinks of is like the Odyssey. So would you, with you know making characters like Nobody, so do you find yourself thinking any literary themes when you're writing things, or is it all out?
Yeah, there are a lot of literary allusions, and I also was thinking about that. In a side project that I was telling you about that I'm working with a novelist on, that pun actually comes into play directly, because I'm fascinated by the way it works in the Greek, because there's a layer there that doesn't come out in the English. At the beginning of the Odyssey, when it says Odysseus is a man of twists and turns, or man of guile, it's sometimes translated as. That word in classical Greek, metis, sounds like the nobody or no man that he's using in the Polyphemus stories. It's like, no man has blinded me. It's metis. And so, in a sense, it's also saying guile has blinded me. And I'm interested in that wordplay, and it comes out. It's foregrounded in this piece that's connected to Firebones, but is separate. But throughout Firebones, yeah, there are a lot of those little things like that. It's not so much that I'm doing it. I don't really think of it as like putting in the Easter eggs for the, a literate audience or whatever. It's just that I love literature, and so you just refer to the things you love. I'm just as likely to refer to something my dad said, or that one of my football coaches or country preacher said. It's just another thing that's in the swirl.
Let's continue the conversation after reception. Out in Fishman Gallery will be also a book signing where you can buy a book and get Greg to sign it. I want to thank you all for coming, and thanks, of course, to the Henry Murphy Foundation for supporting tonight's programming. And thank you, Greg, for a wonderful presentation.
Thank y'all for coming.